Hello everyone, welcome to Org Talk Presents, a program brought to you by the EPCC Architecture Society. Today I will be interviewing architect Eric Corey Fried, founder of organicARCHITECT and a recognized figure in the organic architecture field. This is your host, Eduardo Diaz, an ambassador for the EPCC Architecture Society. Hope you enjoy. Hi, Mr. Fried, can you hear me?
Hey, how are you?
Great, and you?
Good.
That's great. How are you doing this morning?
I'm fine. How are you?
Fine too. Sorry, bit nervous about this. Yeah.
Oh, you don't need to. You don't need to be nervous on my account.
Okay. I was wondering if we could start off with you giving us like a little bit of an introduction about you. Where you studied, and I saw that you have been a part of many organizations and many parts where they made like curriculums for universities about eco-friendly architecture. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Oh gosh, where should I start?
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Okay. I think I don't think I've done anything special other than be stubborn. I really think that that's a large part of it. I've gotten to work with a lot of really talented people, and a lot of not talented people. And I don't think talent has much to do with success, depending on how you define success.
Yeah.
But I knew that I saw something that didn't make sense to me in the world, which was the way we were building our buildings. And I just felt like that needed to change. So I stubbornness was a large part of it. And then I kind of stumbled upon this idea of, if I can talk passionately about what I believe in, it will start to attract people, right? It'll attract people that want to hire me and want to work with me, and want to help me achieve this vision. And that's probably the biggest lesson I can give to anybody, right? Is don't be shy about sharing your vision for the world, because this remarkable thing happens where it really starts to attract people that want to help you.
Yeah, that you kind of deprive yourself of really, having direction, having like a goal, and also you deprive others of the inspiration or the motivation you could bring, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I was fortunate enough to know that I wanted to be an architect when I was really young, and that gives you a certain patience, I think is probably the right way to think of it, right? Because think about it. When I was 8 years old, I already knew I wanted to be an architect. By the time I was 10, my parents had, because I was talking about it, my parents took me to cool buildings and pointed out cool buildings. And one of them that they took me to was Frank Lloyd Wright's building in Philadelphia, where I grew up. So by 8, I knew I wanted to be an architect. By 10, I saw Frank Lloyd Wright and knew that I wanted to be a different kind of architect. I knew that I wanted to push things forward. And then I also knew, okay, well, I still have to graduate high school. So that's another 7 years. And then I have to go to college. That's another 5 years. And then I have to practice for 3 before I can get my license. So I knew that I had this kind of like 18-year road ahead of me before I could even start to do anything. And so on the one hand, it gives you a certain bit of patience, I think, but it also, it gave me a lot of time to be introspective and think about, what is my role and responsibility here? What is the mark I want to make on the world? What is my responsibility to make the world a better place? And so it gives you, on the one hand, it's infuriating, right? Because it's you're rushing for life to start. And so much of my childhood was that of like, I just want to get out. I felt like I was busting. And so much of it was so much of it was like, okay, well, I guess I have time to plot and think about this. So, that was part of it. And I really think that it's all of our duties and responsibilities to really make a world a better place, which means that you have to figure out what to you is your vision of making the world a better place. And secondly, what can you do to contribute to that vision? And you don't have to do it all yourself. The best thing is that if you can just be passionate about this vision and very clear about this vision, then suddenly people will come and want to participate. And if you look at what I've done, my day to day is as an architect. I'm designing and consulting on buildings. It's not I don't think it's a very sexy or glamorous job.
Yeah.
But I'm, but I'm also using every bit of media at my disposal, right? I'm writing books, I'm writing articles, I'm doing interviews and podcasts, I'm going on TV and on radio, and I'm basically shouting from the rooftops, hey, this is a problem and we need to do something about it. And this is how I can contribute to that. And everybody else can find their own way to contribute to it, including you.
Okay. Yeah, I saw that your site had some interviews that you have done with TV, right? And I also saw that you have many books. I think you just released some. Yeah, like architecture, how to make green buildings for students, for architecture students. I think it was a name similar to that. And yeah, that's great. I really enjoy like looking at eco-friendly architecture. That's something I really enjoy. So, when Mr. Moreno told me about maybe interviewing you, and I kind of saw quickly the site, I got excited for, I really do think that it's really important, right, for an architect to kind of start thinking about how he can contribute to, helping with climate change and, and all of these global and ecological issues, right? Because we kind of built the environment, right? That's something that Mr. Moreno once told me, that we kind of built the environment, so we have a really big responsibility on trying to keep it as ecological as possible.
Yeah, but it's climate change is such a large issue. Like I remind my students of this all the time. I've had my entire life to get used to it, to get used to the idea of this massive problem that's hanging over our heads. And for a lot of the students, they haven't. They really just started thinking about it in the last year. And so it's very easy to get overwhelmed. It's very easy to feel like this is an insurmountable problem that you can't overcome. And so, if you're feeling that way, then really the goal is to think about, well, what can I do in the interim? What are the small things that I can do? I've also never been a big fan of making people feel guilty about their actions. Like, you should feel terrible because you drive a car, or you should feel like an awful person because you ate a cheeseburger once. That's not the way to really solicit widespread fundamental change. All it's going to do is really turn people off to what you're trying to do. And, instead, I think the best thing we can do is really inform people and show them that I have a better alternative, right? A green building is a better building. And so, I don't need to make them feel terrible or feel guilty about their decisions. I need to show them that, well, the traditional way of building is stupid. And my building generates energy and oxygen and makes you feel better. And, why wouldn't you want that? I was very adamant about that from the start. I just saw that you're not going to get people to change by making them feel bad about themselves.
Yeah, because they can get into this mentality where, well, I have already done all of these really bad stuff for the environment and I'm still doing, so what's the point in me trying to change it, right? But if you're kind of promoting them the better ways or the right ways, instead of kind of criticizing them for the wrong ways, you're kind of giving them the tools to kind of start taking action, right?
Yeah, it's also, we're all guilty. That's the trouble. So, who am I to say that you're a bad person because you ate a cheeseburger? I've certainly I had a cheeseburger this weekend, right? So I feel like
Yeah.
we're all guilty of it. And the real people, if you want to point blame at anybody, point it at the 20, fossil fuel companies that are responsible for most of this impact. Pointed at pointed at Exxon and Monsanto and, the ones that are really doing the damage knowingly in the sake of profits. They're the ones that should feel guilty, not you for growing up in this mess. But the good news is that really is that the entire world needs to be redesigned, and we're designers. So what a great time to be alive. It's kind of my thought of, we get to redesign everything. It all needs to be fixed. It all needs to be redesigned. Well, that's the business I'm in. I'm in the redesign business. So, that's how I see it. See it as an opportunity, and then it won't be so overwhelming.
Yeah. Some way to kind of start something. Yeah, to start kind of taking the old and modernizing it so it can be better. I kind of had a question about that. I also saw that your team developed something called Prostruction. It said something about architecture being developed out of biology. I was wondering, I think you were kind of referring to that, right? Like how would that work, or what does it refer to?
So prostruction is the word that I came up with to describe this. But really, within your DNA are a series of instructions, a series of building blocks.
Yeah.
And not only can program you to become, human, and 2 eyes and 2 ears and 2 nostrils, and but embedded within our DNA is code for a lot of other things that we don't use. And in fact, all living things on Earth have this DNA instruction set in them that's shared. It's just the majority of it is turned off. We share, believe it or not, 50% of the DNA with a banana. I don't know if you know that.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's a lot of instructions within our body that just lie dormant. And what biologists are now starting to do is they're starting to realize that they can tap into these bits of instructions and turn them on and turn them off. And imagine if we could do that, not for living creatures, because that might be a little scary, but do it for materials, right? So we could manipulate the DNA of a tree, or of a mushroom, or of a bacteria, or a rhizome, or a coral, or something else, and in doing so, program it into a certain shape, or have certain aspects. And the crazy part is that all of this is actually possible. So you could grow building materials, and those building materials could have certain attributes. So here. So this is mycelium. It's a fungus. It's mushrooms, right? It's a mushroom fungus, and it's been grown into a brick. And what we could do is, first of all, it's naturally fire resistant. It's of course 100% biodegradable. It's completely healthy. There's no carcinogens in it. No formaldehyde, no anything that'll kill us. And we could grow more without killing anything. So instead of chopping things down and destroying them, which is the way we normally do things, we could instead grow materials. And if we can grow materials, why couldn't we grow entire buildings? And so that's what prostruction is really after. This idea that let's create engineered bio-based living materials, and then eventually we'll get to growing them into whole buildings. But for right now, I'm just happy with getting materials. And then if we do that, we can start to turn on some of those DNA instructions. So this, the DNA in the mycelium could be programmed to be bioluminescent, so it could glow in the dark. It could be programmed to heal. So if I put a hole in it, like with a nail, and I pull the nail out, it could heal itself. We could program it to absorb VOCs or CO2 or whatever we want, because all of those instruction sets are already mapped out and known. So it's really it's like a computer program. It's really just adding little bits of code. And that's what these biologists have figured out. And that's what I'm trying to do with buildings. And that's what prostruction is. And so I think you could start to see the possibilities are somewhat endless.
Yeah, no, if that came out of a fungus, they're pretty big. And have you started to grow up the materials and started, actually using them on commissions, or are you still like in the phase of actually figuring out how do you want the materials, what are the genetics of the materials, and what exactly kind of start mapping out that code? Are you still in that phase, or have you started using them little by little, or like how far would we be about actually using it at a larger scale? I don't mean like the buildings, because I suppose that's like super far, but I mean like kind of start maybe seeing them in the open market, or things like that.
No, we're using them. We're using them in buildings right now, and they're commercially available right now. And then there's a whole pipeline of products that aren't yet commercially available, but I'm using my projects as a way to try them out, so it helps the manufacturer. But then, but for the most part, they're generally non-structural materials, right? Because structural materials need to be fireproofed, they need to be load tested, they need all these approvals and certifications. So we start with basically non-structural materials. So I'm not growing 2x4s yet, but but 2x4s are already grown in a certain sense in that they're trees, right? So, but I'd love to get to a point where I can do a 2x4 that's grown without deforesting the planet.
Yeah.
The real challenge right now is concrete, because we use concrete in virtually every single building, and concrete is perhaps the worst thing that we do from a carbon perspective in the building, right? 8% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from the manufacture of Portland cement that goes into concrete. So it's probably the biggest impact is first concrete. The second biggest is steel, and the third biggest is aluminum and glass, right? Or, that are kind of tied. So those 3 or 4 materials are really, those are my initial targets. Let's find replacements for those.
Okay, and for example,
because those have the biggest carbon impact right now. So there's an urgency for those. But eventually, I'd love to really have the entire building be made out of these engineered bio-based living materials.
Okay, so right now we're more like a furnishing type of material. It isn't exactly structural.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're finishes, right? So because of the building code, I'm not doing load-bearing columns that are bio-based yet.
Yeah.
That's okay. But what we are doing is we're looking at things that we're mixing into the concrete to reduce the carbon emissions from it. We're looking at replacing all the finished materials that have a high embodied carbon content. And the best part is that nature already gives us an abundance of incredible materials to choose from that already exist. And we're just kind of engineering them to be a little better. So it's not as far off as you might think.
Okay, that's great. And are you right now only like engineering, fungus, or have you started looking into materials that more traditional plants or trees, or like what sources of materials are you looking into?
I'll give you an example. There's a company called BioMason is the name of the company, and it's just biomason.com if you want to check it out. And they really started with this idea of they wanted to grow a concrete block. That was their initial vision and mission. And so they mixed bacteria with some kind of recycled aggregates, and they ended up making this essentially alternative to concrete tile. So it's not load bearing yet, right? It's still they're making tiles, but it's taking a material that has a huge embodied carbon footprint and making a bio-based version of it. And it also happens to be very beautiful as well. So you could tile your projects with this tile today. You could tile your walls, whatever you want to do with it, with this bio-based tile today that's made from bacteria and recycled aggregate. And so there's kind of an easy one-to-one replacement but nobody would even think twice about.
Yeah, I didn't actually know that. That's pretty cool.
There's another company called Newlight that has a product called Air Carbon, and it's essentially CO2 that's been harvested out of the ocean. So they're pulling carbon dioxide out of the ocean and they're making it into a type of plastic. And this plastic is infinitely recyclable. So they can make it into whatever they want, and it's fully biodegradable. That's the best part. So they're pulling CO2 out of the ocean. They're making it into plastics. When you're done with that plastic, they can remake it into something else, so it doesn't downcycle. And so I love products like that because they're really solving multiple problems at the same time along their entire supply chain, and really getting into what we call a circular economy in terms of the materials and the entire material process.
Yeah, like hitting a bird, no, hitting two birds with one stone, right?
Exactly.
That's great. And for example, when you're looking into the commissions, into your, you know, your commissions, what should come? What do you think, or for you, what comes first? Do you first analyze the surrounding environment and kind of start deciding off from there, or do you see the budget and then from the budget kind of start deciding, okay, with this budget, what are the best ecological decisions I can take for this project, and kind of start from there?
Oh, well, you know, everybody's a little different and every project's a little different, but generally we start with the problem, right? What is the problem that we're looking to solve, right? We're going to build a student center on this campus, or a hospital on this site, or whatever it is we're designing. So first is really mapping out what are the spaces and problems that we need to fit on this site. And then what are the problems that we're not solving that we need to be?
Yeah.
So a lot of that is, how much energy is this building going to produce? And, how is the orientation to the sun going to matter? So it really starts with the nature of the problem and then the site at the same time, and then really kind of marrying those two together and thinking about it in terms of form. And then all the while you're kind of keeping budget in mind up here. So it's almost like juggling. I feel like,
yeah.
You're kind of trying to keep all these different balls in the air at the same time. And you're constantly going back and forth between them. So you're designing this. Well, how do we get it within budget? And so you end up kind of, it's almost like, that old story where an airline pilot will tell you that 97% of the time you're off course, and they're just constantly kind of readjusting course all the time. I kind of feel like the building design is like that. We're constantly kind of, imagining what's possible, and then then kind of going back and figuring out how to make it work in terms of the budget and the schedule. And you have to keep letting yourself do that, right? Come up with what's needed and appropriate for the site and for the client, and then find a way to make it work. And that's the real challenge of it. Anybody can design something crazy looking. The real skill is designing something crazy looking that also you can afford to build, right? At the same time. So, you're constantly off course, but you're kind of coming back to it, and you're, juggling all those differing concerns at the same time. That's kind of how I think about it. And then, we also spend a time looking for things, right? Where I'll kind of have in my mind, I'm looking for a material for this wall or this surface, and, but I want it to have these qualities or these characteristics. And then I go looking for it. But, to me, so much of it is really about light and sun and wind, and we know the sun's going to rise in the east and set in the west. We know where it is every minute of every day in the sky. Let's design the building appropriately for that. And in doing so, we make a building that's also much less energy intensive. So these things start to really come together. So you're designing the windows, but designing them with the summer sun in mind, but then designing that with the feeling of being in the space, designed with, the daylighting and the function that's going to take place in that room. And, it's basically a lot of this, whatever this gesture is, of, the fingers kind of going together. It's a lot of that.
Yeah, like, like doing a puzzle, just figuring out what pieces should go there and what pieces should not go there, trying to figure it out all together so it meshes.
Yeah, exactly.
And just if you still have time, final question. I was wondering, what, like, in doing the eco-friendly architecture, what do you think has been like the biggest challenge, and how do you think, students and professionals as well can kind of start dealing with those issues, or in the case of students, kind of start preparing for those?
Perhaps the biggest challenge is that people are afraid to start, right?
Yeah.
Most of my students end up saying things like, well, I don't know enough yet, or I need to, I need to become an expert in this. Or I need to, there's so much more I don't know. And in doing so, they don't do anything. And you don't need to beat yourself up so much. The best thing for you to do is just to start, right? Just to try it. And will you make mistakes along the way? Yeah, but it'll be better than just doing nothing. And the other, kind of goes back to what we started the conversation with, which is, well, if you can get people clear on the vision, you also don't need to do it all alone. So make this big vision, and you'd be amazed at what ideas start to bubble up from everybody else. One of the things that I'll do at the very, very beginning of the project is I'll put forth a big vision, and I'll say something like, what if this was the healthiest building on campus? What would that mean to you? What would that look like? What comes to mind when I say that? How would you define that? How would you describe it? What would it mean to the students? What would it mean to the faculty? What would it mean to the staff for this to be the healthiest building on campus? What would that take? And for some people, it's very proscriptive, right? Where they have visions of what it would mean or how you'd feel. For others, it's very prescriptive, meaning, well, I would expect there'd be solar panels on the roof, and I'd expect there'd be lots of natural light. And they have a list and everybody's somewhat different. But starting with that vision is really a great way to get everybody on board and rally everybody into this big vision. And the best part is that once they've agreed to that vision, it doesn't get, kind of tossed out because of budget. It's not like saying, hey, let's do solar panels. And at the very end, they go, oh, yeah, we can't afford them. And then they cut them, right? Instead, this is the vision. There's multiple ways to get there. Let's find the best way to get there.
Like lighting a spark, and then everyone else kind of gets in, right? And starts helping you continue that trend or that direction.
Right.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time, Mr. Fried. This was a great interview. I really like, hearing everything, especially the things about construction. Sorry about that. And well, yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you for doing this. So I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Fried. Have a great day. And yeah, me too. Nice meeting you.
All right. Bye.
This concludes our program. Thank you for listening to ArchTalk Presents, a program brought to you by the EPCC Architecture Society. This is an interview with architect Eric Corey Fried, founder of Organic Architect. This is your host, Eduardo Diaz. Thank you for watching.